Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a situation that is literally sending massive, unprecedented economic shockwaves across the entire globe. For 11 weeks now, the Strait of Hormuz, which is arguably the single most critical maritime artery on the planet, has been effectively closed to normal naval traffic. The sheer scale of this disruption is absolutely staggering, and it's backing the global shipping industry into an incredibly tight corner. So we're going to unpack the stark reality of this closure, the astronomical financial losses that are mounting up every single day, and the incredibly complex legal and geopolitical debate over how to actually fix it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the current physical standstill at the choke point. Then, we'll crunch the actual math of this closure. Third, we'll tackle the big question: is paying a toll actually cheaper? Fourth, we'll dive into the maritime law precedents. And finally, we'll weigh the pure economics against the geopolitical realities.
All right, Section 1, the choke point standstill. To understand this, we need to look at the physical reality on the water right now. Since the conflict kicked off back on February 28th, the normal, everyday flow of global trade through this region has basically vanished. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is maintaining an iron grip over the strait, and simultaneously, a U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports just hasn't succeeded in reopening the waterway to standard commercial traffic. Before this conflict, we'd see anywhere from 120 to 140 ships traveling through this passage every single day. Today, it's barely a trickle. Less than 4% of peacetime traffic is getting through, and that's almost entirely made up of vessels whose owners have directly negotiated authorization with Iranian authorities.
Moving on to Section 2, the math of closure.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's at stake here. Just look at that 27%. In peacetime, 20.3 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That is over a quarter of the entire global maritime oil trade, entirely reliant on this one single, irreplaceable choke point. I mean, think about that. There is absolutely no alternative route for Gulf producers to ship their exports to the open ocean, and the vast majority of this crude is desperately needed to keep Asian markets running.
So what happens when you close a valve that massive? Well, the financial bleed is catastrophic. We are looking at a staggering loss of $114.8 billion in oil revenues per day. It's almost hard to wrap your head around that number. And it doesn't even stop there. An additional $7.8 billion worth of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is also trapped. Because of this total standstill, roughly 2,000 ships are currently just stranded on either side of the strait. And this massive disruption in oil, gas, fertilizers, and general maritime traffic, it's a massive primary driver behind the severe cost of living crises that are currently rippling across several reeling countries. It affects all of us.
Which brings us to Section 3, is the toll cheaper?
So, here is the harsh, practical reality facing the owners of those 2,000 stranded ships. On one hand, you have the staggering cost of doing nothing. Remaining anchored means paying daily crew wages, servicing massive ship loans, keeping up with repairs, and absorbing just massively inflated war risk insurance premiums. The daily burn rate is astronomical. Now, on the other hand, we have the proposed alternative, Iranian authorization. Tehran is reportedly charging a transit fee of up to $2 million per ship. So when you actually weigh the bleeding daily cost of a sitting tanker against that flat $2 million fee, a really uncomfortable economic reality starts to emerge.
And this quote from a reigning American economist Nader Habibi hits the nail on the head. He emphasizes the purely mathematical perspective, noting that, objectively speaking, paying the toll is less expensive than remaining stranded. I mean, if you're a shipping CEO looking strictly at a spreadsheet, handing over that $2 million is by far the quickest way to stop the financial hemorrhage and get your cargo to market. But as we all know, international shipping is never, ever just about a simple spreadsheet.
Let's look at Section 4, Maritime Law Precedents.
Now, you might be wondering, is charging a fee like this even legal? Well, international law is actually quite specific here. It fiercely protects free transit through strategic natural waters. That means countries are generally barred from imposing pure, simple passage tolls on natural waterways. However, and this is the absolute critical legal gray area we're dealing with, countries are allowed to charge for actual services provided. We're talking about things like security controls, physical inspections, traffic management, and insurance regimes.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how international precedent treats different types of waterways. Take the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. Because these are artificial, man-made waterways where a country actually built and actively maintains the physical infrastructure, they can legally charge massive direct transit fees. But contrast that with Turkey's Bosporus Strait and Dardanelles. These are natural straits. Turkey cannot legally charge a toll just to pass through, but they do tightly control the scheduling, and they legally charge for navigation-related services, things like lighthouse operations, rescue readiness, and medical support. This is essentially the model Iran could theoretically try to lean on to justify its fees.
But here is the massive geopolitical complication. Turkey's straits pass entirely through Turkish territorial waters. Turkey owns it outright, end of story. The Strait of Hormuz is fundamentally different. Yes, it passes through the territorial waters of Iran, but it also passes through Oman, with external parts reaching the United Arab Emirates. So because Iran doesn't solely own the Strait of Hormuz, imposing a unilateral toll or service system on it is completely 100% legally unprecedented.
And that brings us to our final section, economics versus geopolitics.
As Anisette Tabrizi from Chatham House rightly points out, the economics alone aren't going to solve this stalemate. And why is that? Because of heavy U.S. sanctions. Western shipping companies simply cannot make a rational, strictly cost-benefit decision to wire $2 million to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's just not politically or legally feasible for these companies to do that. So we're stuck in this massive stalemate where the economics are screaming for movement, but the politics strictly forbid it.
So what's the actual realistic path forward here? Well, economist Mohammad Reza Farzanegin proposes that the only true way out is a workable regional arrangement. This would mean the UAE, Oman, Qatar, and Iran actually sitting down and working together out of shared economic necessity. The framework would look something like this: a joint maritime authority, shared monitoring systems, coordinated emergency responses, and a mutually agreed-upon system of service-based contributions to maintain safe passage. This approach gives Iran a recognized role, but it normalizes the waterway for the other Persian Gulf economies.
So the crucial point is captured right here by Nader Habibi. An unprecedented arrangement like this cannot just be Iran collecting a unilateral toll. It requires absolute, complete coordination between the Gulf countries, literally sharing any transit fees that are collected. And crucially, it requires the explicit approval of major global powers, like the United States and China, to either lift or bypass the sanctions that currently prevent these payments. It is an incredibly tall order for international diplomacy.
Which leaves us right here. We've looked at the staggering multi-billion-dollar daily losses, we've seen the 2,000 stranded ships waiting in limbo, and we've walked through the highly complicated legal precedents of charging for natural waterways. The underlying math is incredibly clear, but the politics, they are incredibly dense. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. Is paying a shared, heavily regulated toll to Iran simply the inevitable, pragmatic price the world has to pay for global energy predictability? Or is it a geopolitical compromise that the international community is fundamentally unready and unwilling to make? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep a close eye on how this unprecedented standoff continues to develop.